Hey, everybody. Live from Denver, it is Friday night. Welcome to Critical Conversations. It appears all is in order. Hey, guys. Hey, welcome back to the show, Michael. All right, cool. Been a while. Hope y'all are hearing us good. I was, give me a...
Hello, everyone.
There we go. As you can see, I am joined by my beautiful wife, Melissa. Yay. There we go. All right, good. Yes. And we have some fun for you tonight. Today has been a good day. I have just got stuff to talk about. We got things. But first, in wonderful acknowledgement and recognition of the return of Mel.
Hello. I am back.
I moved the title. I made a little change formatting-wise. Last week, I completely screwed up and didn't even change the damn title.
Oh, no.
Oops. But this time, I'm putting it up on the top of the screen there. So now you'll have the show topic up there where we used to have the, with the phone number, but we're not doing the calls now. So I thought it would be better and more obvious to throw it up there. And no, my mom was only here for last weekend. She's back home now. Mm-hmm. And we had a great trip. And went up to Boulder for part of the day. We traveled, did all the stuff, but basically just had a nice family visit, and that was nice. So, yeah, she's done with that. Okay, good. So let's do this thing. First off, let's start with your quote. Tonight's topic being Deception, Dependency, and Dread, the DDD model.
This is just like a general cult quote from Frank Zappa. The only difference between a cult and a religion is the amount of real estate they own. I thought that was kind of funny.
Ha ha. Cool. All right. Well, we're going to be talking about cult stuff tonight for sure. But before we do, let's see. Should I start with this or should I? No, I'm going to actually kick it into high gear with our Snuggles Not Struggles cam, our Benson cam here.
That thing.
So yeah, check this out. This is our little bundle of Furry Joy. We love this guy, and here he is, freshly laundered.
Yeah, I gave him a conditioning and a brushing.
Yeah. This afternoon, he got a nice little dry wash, and she does such a great job with him, and he's got his little fish toy there, but he's just chilling in the living room there, and this is kind of where we hang out with him a lot. And
and that's his new fish toy that he just got last weekend.
That's right. Yeah, he's always ready to go out. That is absolutely for sure. But yeah, he's our nice little indoor dog. We must have played tug of fetch like 2 or 3 times today.
And I played it with him a little bit too.
Yeah, he's always into it. There he is.
Now he looks like he's smiling.
Yeah, exactly. He's got that little Ewok Wilford Brimley thing going on right now. Totally. He's fully back in
diabetes.
That's right. So there's our Snuggles Not Struggles cam for you for this evening to overload you with cuteness before we dive into anything too horrible. Now, actually, I actually wanted to share something with you all tonight. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details of this, but I had some thoughts, and I wanted to share this with you guys because I have talked about, a lot of negatives and a lot of kind of stuff sometimes when I'm in a bit of a mood. But today I'm in a good mood. I'm in a really good mood, and I wanted to share this with you. So part of a vital part of getting on with your life and moving forward is finding people to love, having people in your life, and family, of course, are right there as the immediate targets, and and there's even some obligation that they're supposed to and that sort of thing. But I had an unusual situation in my life of having sired a child. The product of my loins,
oh my
so to speak, right, as they used to say. And he grew up on the other side of the world, and he grew up to be a really fine young man. And I love my son because I went out to Australia years ago and got to meet him and interact and hang out with him. Well, anyway, we've been in touch, but it's been difficult, and I'm just as difficult as he. It's just a thing. We are not great at communicating through letters and things like that, or connecting. Sometimes it can take a while, but we connected yesterday and had this wonderful 3-hour chat and got all caught up on everything. And I'm just in a really great mood because I haven't been in the position of being able to give truly fatherly advice before, if I'm being honest. I'm all just like, woo, right now about all that, because I just think that's kind of fun, and a real goal accomplished. Anyway, just putting that relationship there, putting it more there, and being there for somebody, and having that is really, really big, and at least for me personally. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. But there was something I needed to talk about with this that goes more to, of course, every moment in my life is a goddamn teaching moment. And I'm always trying to, observe and pick up and figure things out. And I'm sure a lot of you who have children have already had this whole thought process. I'm not saying anything new or wild here, but when you do the kind of work I've been working on for 10 years of trying to figure out why people act the way they do, there's this genetic thing. And when you see, when I see my son, my grown adult son, and we talk about the struggles he's had in his life and how he was never in Scientology. He avoided that. He stayed away from that, and his mother wisely and wonderfully did not force it on him like some Scientology parents do. And I am very, very happy with her about that. She's still a Scientologist. He is not, and never has been, never called himself that. So he was not cult influenced the same way I was. And yet so many of the struggles that I had growing up through my life, he's had too, because we have the same nature, the same temperament, even though I wasn't even around to influence that.
Isn't that funny how that can happen? It's like those twin studies where they'll have twins that were separated at birth or something, and they still have all this stuff in common.
That's what I'm talking about. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about, is you can see the absolute influence of genetics, right? Of passing on the genes and what results, right? And sure, environment has a lot to do with how we end up turning out, right? Where we are, what language we speak, what educational opportunities we get, our socioeconomic status. I've talked about this stuff for years, right? All these influencers. But when you see that parallel right in front of your eyes, right? The struggles with ADHD type stuff, with attention stuff, with rejection stuff, with emotional stuff, with introversion, extroversion. I honestly am wondering right now, and this is something that people have asked me about over the years, and I've had an answer, but I'm actually kind of rethinking this, and that has to do with my own introversion, extroversion. I don't know if there's some book or rule somewhere that you have to be an introvert or have to be an extrovert, and this, you can't be somewhere in the middle. But my life has been an introverted life, cosplaying being an extrovert. And that cosplaying came a lot from Scientology and pressures from Scientology to do public speaking. You got to do what you got to do. And if you got to make it go right to get something done, meaning you got to go talk to a bunch of people. Yeah, we don't care how introverted or uncomfortable you feel about this in our cult. Get to it, right? You got to go do that work, and you force yourself, to go do those things. And And then after a while, you just kind of get into the how to do this and how to do public speaking, how to do graduations, how to do course room supervision. I just kind of had to figure that out and overcome a lot of the natural introversion that I have. I don't want to go out and be the life of the party and all that, but yet I did a whole switch coming out of the cult. Over the last 10 years, that has been one of the things that has stripped away. I've been less boisterous in the life of the party and the most interesting guy in the room. For years now, I'm not that guy anymore. And when I first got out of Scientology, I very much was. And I loved being the center of attention. I liked people listening to me. I still like people listening to me, but... obviously.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, but in terms of wanting to go out, wanting to hang out, wanting to spend hours with people, getting that energy from that, I'm definitely more in the introvert category. And so I wonder now, especially after speaking with Josh and all the other stuff, that whether I ever would have been cosplaying as an extrovert, whether my life would have been one of a lot more introversion had that not interfered. And I'm not giving a value judgment to that. I've already said I'm not in the land of regrets anymore when it comes to my cult experience. I can't change it. I have to roll with it, and it is what made me who I am. So I'm not looking back on it like, oh, what could have been. It's more of a, I wonder if I would have been, a very different person, like really different, So anyway, just kind of things that make you go, and yeah, it's the brain chemistry and all that. It's just these things that it's undeniable. You can't have that, I can't have that conversation and walk through all the different difficulties and not see so many same. And the fact I wasn't around to influence that or do anything with that or create that in him, it just speaks volumes about, our genetic temperaments. And I was thinking in terms of temperament and attitude and how those are probably the things that are most influenced or created by genes, right? Genes are not, I really like, Spider-Man. That's not,
no.
You don't have a gene for that, right? But
in our, a tendency towards creative, yeah.
Exactly. Or a tendency toward aesthetics or toward sort of rigid control system, a rigid way of looking at life versus a more loose, wavy, gravy kind of, let's just let things roll. Like, these are the sorts of things that I think are happening at the genetic level. Again, layman understanding of this, but those are my ideas. Now, as far as how did my son end up in Australia, that's where he was born and raised because his mom is Australian. I met her when we were both doing full-time training for Scientology back in 1990-91. And we met doing the Key to Life orientation course release. It was a whole big thing. Like, they do releases now in Scientology, a Golden Age of Tech, Golden Age of Admin. Well, back in the 80s and 90s, they would release courses or training or books and auditing stuff kind of one at a time, not these great, big, huge package deals they do now. And Key to Life and Life Orientation were a big, big deal for Scientology back then. And so I went down to LA to train on that. She went to LA to train on that from her org, and she was from Perth, Australia. So we connected as twins on the course, and then we connected otherwise. So yeah, and you're not supposed to do that, but we did. So that's kind of how that happened. And we didn't know when she went back to Australia that she was pregnant, and we got busted. We were in a lot of trouble. It's a long story, but I'm just giving you the highlights here. And then she got sent home, and then when she got back is when she found out she was pregnant. I was in Santa Barbara. She was in Perth. We literally couldn't have been farther apart on this planet, I don't think. And we tried for 3 years to sort of make something of it, but it didn't work out. And so because I wasn't going to leave Santa Barbara, because no one was interested in me leaving to go there to be the father of my son. Scientology was always more important, right? So, and I was a cult member, and I bought into that whole line. And that's the only regret that I have, is that right there. Is that out of that whole experience, it's the only thing I look back on and still go, damn it, I really, really wish I had made different choices there. But knowing what I know now and looking back on me and the situation at that time, there was no other option for me, really. I didn't have the money or the resources to get out to Australia, and no one was interested, not even my family was interested in sending me out there or helping me to get out there. And so it didn't work out. And that's what happened. And so years and years went by, and after I got out of Scientology, I, got over there and reconnected. So those are the highlights. Okay. So had to mention that, because it was, because it's funny how much more of this ADHD, rejection stuff, emotional dysregulation stuff, the introversion stuff, it's amazing to me how much more I'm learning about this, how separate from the cult stuff this has been, and answering a lot of questions for me about, why did I do that? Why did I do this? Right? So
it
many
totally answers those questions. Yeah. And then it also starts answering why your family is the way it is, too. When you start looking at members of your family that you suspect probably have a little bit of it, too. And you're like, okay, now I understand why things went the way they did.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. So there you go. So so there's the sharing. Thanks, Leslie. And guys, I guess I am getting a do-over. I guess that is kind of in a way. Not really, but
a second chance.
At least I'm getting I'm getting a second chance at a relationship that I really want. And it's happening. And I'm really happy about that. And I just can't help being really happy about that, but also learning more and more, because I'm always doing that. So, speaking of, I have some things to go over with you guys tonight. I have been doing some research reading lately of cult recovery stuff, and this came up, and I was too good to not share with you guys. This is actually some older stuff. This is back from the 90s. A man named Dr. Michael Langione, who was the executive director or president or head of, I'm not sure about the titles, but he was the guy running the International Cultic Studies Association for many years. Back in 97, I think it was 96 or 97, he wrote an article called, for Psychiatric Times magazine, called Clinical Update on Cults. And this, this was for therapists. And like I said, it was published in Psychiatric Times. But I thought we might go over some of this information. It's not too technical, and I'm gonna go through and make it easier. It's not full. This is not an academic paper, but it is. It's got some big words, and so we're gonna go through this because it's a different or simplified model of coercion and cult recruitment and experience, the cult sort of arc, the beginning, middle, and end. And these consist of these 3 Ds: deception, dependency, and dread. And I was like, dread? What does that mean? I think about dread. I think about like, like dark places, right? And regrets and things like that. But this is a little interesting. And so I thought, again, I'd want to share it with you guys, because this doesn't get talked about now. I've not seen one reference to this until I was, like I said, doing my research reading. And it's a real shame, especially on YouTube, I think, how temporary and sort of like whoosh, it comes and it's gone the attitude is about the video work that gets dropped on YouTube and stuff. Of course, I endlessly complain about this, but also in terms of some of the developments and models and work that's been done on cults or any field, sometimes we get all this really interesting information, and then sometimes it just sort of parks.
Yeah.
And it doesn't carry on, even though it's perfectly valid work. It just sort of sits there. Nobody's really building on it, and things kind of go in a different direction. Not invalidating what was there, and I think this is kind of an example of one of those things. There have been, just so you guys know, there have been probably hundreds of models of cultic behavior or influence over the years. Steve Hassan's BITE model is super, super popular because it's super, super easy to remember. BITE, B-I-T-E. I mean, it's like, wow, that's real easy. And it's a good model, but it's not the be-all, end-all of existence when it comes to understanding cults. And it's just kind of interesting to see these different ways of looking at it. Some models are ridiculously complicated, and others try to, narrow it down to the key things. What is it that we're doing here? And with the BITE model, of course, you have it in terms of the 4 sort of domains of control that a cult is exerting: behavior, information, thought, and emotion. Right? B-I-T-E. When you have a group that is exerting an undue level of control on those topics or areas for a person, no matter what the cult theme is, whether it's religious or self-help or psychiatric help or whatever the theme of the cult is, if it's doing those 4 things, then you can go, yeah, this is too much control. This is not okay. This is kind of culty, right? This is a cult. Well, here, deception, dependency, and dread. What are these things? The manipulativeness of cults, that's a big word, manipulativeness of cults,
yeah, that is a big word.
Similar to the debility-dependency-dread syndrome. It starts out here as debility-dependency-dread syndrome explanation of how the Chinese communists were able to gain a high degree of control over American POWs during the Korean conflict. So that's where this information and this modeling comes out of, is Lifton Studies and others, Farber here it quotes, who were doing research on this, trying to figure out why is it that people go to war, get captured as prisoners of war, and are put through some process where at the end of that process, they show up on a TV screen praising the enemy and decrying America and calling America the bad guys. How do we send soldiers over there from our country? And that's what happens. That was the question. And this model of debility, dependency, and dread was part of the research as to answering how that could happen. Contemporary cults, which operate in an open society and do not have the power of the state at their disposal, cannot forcibly restrain prospects and run them through a debilitating regimen. Right? We don't get to just grab people off the street.
Right, and just be like, okay, now run 5 miles, yeah.
Yeah, kidnap them into a cult, right? Instead, they must fool them. They must persuade prospects that the group is beneficial in some way that appeals to the targeted individuals. We've been over, hours of how recruitment works in cults, and it's all about emotional manipulation and using clever deceit and deception and inference, implying things rather than stating them outright, so the prospect fills in the blanks and makes it out to be this amazing opportunity or coincidence or whatever, this this happenstance that I'm just happened to walk into the right building at the right time, and wow, you guys are amazing, and they're love bombing you, and it's we talk about all this stuff. This is what they have to do, because they can't just knock you over the head and drag you in the back and get you to sign over all the checks in your checking account, right? Or whatever, give over your cards. I don't even know if people get some of these references anymore.
Well, like checking account?
Yeah. I mean, they're around, I know, but people don't write checks anymore, not really.
They don't.
And we used to write a lot of checks.
A lot of places are starting to not accept checks.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And I remember as a kid, writing my first check and it being
it being so cool.
I'm so adult. I'm such an adult.
Now people are like, you're old.
Yeah, exactly. Now they're like, checks. Okay, so cults have to persuade prospects that the group's beneficial, right? As a result of this deception and the systematic use of highly manipulative techniques of influence, recruits come to commit themselves to the group's prescribed ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. And I'm literally just reading Michael Angioni's words here in case I wasn't clear what this is. Now, here's an important part. By gradually isolating members from outside influences, establishing unrealistically high guilt-inducing expectations, punishing any expressions of negativity, and denigrating independent critical thinking, the group causes members to become extremely dependent on its compliance-oriented expressions of love and support. Right? What have we've used all these words to describe cults, right? They are a compliance culture. They're often confession cultures. There's a denigration of critical thinking and any negativity. Nobody wants to hear that, right? We don't know about your doubts and your maunderings. You got to be positive. You got to be full. You got to be certain. You got to be 100% in. You know, this kind of binary all or nothing kind of thinking is so heavily encouraged. Any group that's doing this to you is pushing you in a direction of not thinking clearly. But cults, of course, take it to, you know, it's a state of dependency. Once a state of dependency is firmly established, the group's control over members' thoughts, feelings, and behavior is strengthened by the members' growing dread of losing the group's psychological support. Right? Physical threat also occurs in some groups. However much that support may aim at ensuring their compliance with leadership's often debilitating demands. In other words, you can be in a torturous environment where you are being beaten, where you are being abused, where you feel bad all the time, where you feel emotionally wrought out or exhausted. It doesn't have to be physical abuse, but whatever it is that's wearing you down, and you're like, I got to get out of here. I don't want to do this. But then there's this dread that sets in and is induced by the cult and its expectations so that you can't leave. You don't want to leave. People are always like, why don't they leave? Well, if you had that dread, that cloud of that black mass hanging over your head all the time of, yeah, but then my life will fall apart. I won't have any friends. I won't have any family. I won't have a job. I'm going to be in the streets. I'm going to be in the gutter. And the cult is not doing nothing but telling you this all the time, that's where it's going to happen if you leave. That dread kind of keeps you hanging around. You know, that's part of this whole picture. Yeah, better than flipping burgers. That's right. So, what happens to cult members? The limited research and clinical data concerning cult members seems at first to be perplexing and contradictory. On the one hand, clinicians tell us that cult environments attempt to surreptitiously reshape their members' personalities. It's not obvious what's happening when you're in the cult. It's such a gradual process, and every single step, this I can definitely say from personal experience, every single step, the more insidious, the better the cult is at doing its job, the more sure you are that every step you take is 100% your decision. And that level of influence is powerful because every step you're taking in Scientology, for example, or in NXIVM, isn't your choice. But that's what I mean about how, like he says, insidiously take control and reshape members' personalities, a process that on its face should be fraught with tension. On the other hand, some studies indicate that cult members score in the normal range on personality tests, despite some evidence of attempts to look good, quote unquote.
Well, and then that gets into the whole subject of personality tests.
Well, for sure. But we're not going to worry about that too much right now. Now, other research indicates that joining a cult may reduce perceived distress. Research on cult departure however, suggests that members feel extreme pressure to remain in the cult, and research on post-cult effects indicates that those who leave experience considerable distress after their return to the mainstream world. And yes, that's definitely true. You know, lots and lots of it. That's why I've, and others have produced that. I mean, not just me, like, you know, all these people in all these ex-cult spaces. How many thousands of videos have we all produced breaking all our distresses down? Right? It's powerful stuff. It really does mess with your head in very powerful ways. And so the idea that some people have, a lot of people seem to have, that you're just going to get up and walk away and it's not going to be a big deal. It's not going to linger. It's not going to stay with you. These are silly ideas. Now, if the ex-cult members were unhappy before they joined, became happier after they joined, were pressured to remain, left anyway, and were more distressed than ever after leaving, what could have compelled them to leave and remain apart from the group? The inescapable conclusion seems to be that the cult experience is not what it appears to be. Clinical observers appear to be correct in their contention that dissociative defenses help cultists adapt to the contradictory and intense demands of the cult environment. In other words, to remain in the cult, to stay in the cult, you have to, or most people adopt, dissociative coping mechanisms, right? They separate themselves from the situation mentally, psychologically. They may even, you know, this is the extreme ends of dissociation are memory loss, amnesia, personality change or shift, and or the feeling that you are literally not in your body at all and you are so apart from it that you are observing it from outside. And in Scientology, they account for this as a spiritual experience and want you to dissociate.
Oh my God.
So the coping mechanism in Scientology of dissociating with your fucked up, traumatizing environment feeds right into the Scientology data and narrative that you are a spiritual being, right? Because that you can dissociate so hard that you literally believe you're outside your own body. And in Scientology, that's made a feature, not a bug. It's a good thing you're doing that. Unfortunately, psychologically, it's not a good thing you're doing that.
Nope.
So, no good. So the majority, now here's something you guys might not know, and we don't talk about it a lot because we harp so much on the abusive side, but something you all should know, because it is a fact, is that the majority, 90% or more, of cult members eventually leave the group.
Wow, really?
Yeah, eventually they do. And that's not just Scientology, although Mark Headley was famously quoted, right, as, you know, the end product of Scientology is leaving Scientology. Well, it turns out that's actually the case across the boards. A lot of people are only going to put up with certain levels of abuse for so long, and they escape out the back door, slide out, like my parents, go under the radar, just stop showing up. That happens all the time, right? And this is one of the arguments that the academics and the apologists will use, the cult apologists, for why everything we're talking about with mind control or thought reform isn't true. And that's not true either. See, it's an unwarranted conclusion to say every single person who experiences thought reform techniques is going to be permanently and psychically damaged by it. That's not true. But on the other hand, but most people who experience it, especially at heavy levels, are going to be psychically damaged and traumatized by the experience, but not 100%. You can't say 100%. And so therefore, these guys will use that as a straw man and go, oh, well, so some people just walk right out of their own accord, so therefore, where's your thought reform, Mr. Brainwashing ex-cult guy, right? It didn't work on everybody, so therefore, and it's like, no, that was never the assertion that brainwashing or thought reform techniques work on everybody 100% of the time, and we're going to make everybody a Scientologist with a personality test. That's not how this works. We've made that very clear so many times. So, So it's that, you know, these arguments just go raging back and forth in the same way political arguments go back and forth on social media. People aren't even hearing each other or listening to each other, right? Okay, so However, right, even here, the majority leave the groups. However, individuals' psychological distress when they leave their groups is substantial and typically misunderstood by themselves, their families, and helping professionals. Right? This is back in 97. This was being written. It might as well be written today. Very, very few clinicians and psychiatrists out there have a clue. A lot of therapists are learning more and more about cults these days. Excuse me. But I have yet to run into too many psychiatrists who understand anything about it. Mm-hmm. And therapists and counselors and psychologists are help to find out more and help their people with it. I haven't yet to run into any counselors or therapists or psychologists who push back on it. But we are not anywhere near a place where this is a well understood, this stuff, the thought reform stuff, where this is really well understood. And so cult members don't get it when they come out, their families don't get it, and even the professionals they go to for help often don't get it. And that has been a very big barrier to cult recovery or recovery for anybody who's been in a coercive situation, even domestic abuse and things like that, right? It's hard to know how to navigate that because there's no production line, there's no assembly line for you do 1, 2, 3, and you're all fixed. Trauma and healing and stuff doesn't. It doesn't
work that way. Yeah,
it's a very individual thing. I hate just keep saying that.
And you go back and forth. Yeah. I mean, it's like you start getting better, and then something comes up, and then you're like, oh crap, and you got to deal with that, and then you're better for a while, and then you peel, like you always say, you peel another onion layer off, and then there's more to fix. Exactly.
I'm not actually sure, Xian, in terms of what kind of understanding of this there was in the 70s. Looking back at the literature, there's very little on it. And the 70s is when the religious cult apologists, Brian Wilson, for example, out of England, got really, really... was it Wilson? Yeah. I think it was Brian Wilson was his name. This was somebody Mike Rinder even talked about. Anyway, the cult apologists really started going to town in the 70s, and I don't know what the state of psychology and therapy was for ex-cult members in the 70s. I'm just not sure, because so much of the literature and work that's been done on this has been 80s, 90s, and 2000s. So I don't know that you're going to have... I would be surprised if there was much of anything about cults in the 70s, to be honest with you. Maybe some papers and some work, but not a lot. I haven't seen a lot. Okay. Yeah, there's no way to predict in the individual case whether a particular person will be among the 90% who leave, how long eventually will take in terms of them eventually leaving, because keep in mind, this 90% includes people who leave after 30 years, right? I left, but it took, a
long time.
Or how distressed the person will be when he or she leaves the group. Okay. Yeah. All right. Now, this I thought you guys might find interesting. I wanted to share this with you guys because some of you all who watch these shows are in recovery, are doing cult recovery yourself, or are, trying to navigate your way through, de-traumatizing or de-stressing yourself or something like that. So I thought you might find this part interesting. This is the psychotherapist's role. Former cult members, families of currently or formerly involved cult members, and occasionally current cult members may contact psychotherapists for assistance. Former cult members who seek treatment tend to describe their cult experience as abusive or traumatic. Frequently, however, their understanding of their experience is limited, if not faulty. And believe me, this is challenging. It's not just a matter of trying to explain to somebody on a therapist couch what happened to you. Sometimes your understanding of what happened to you is so poor, so not there, that you can't even put it into words that make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It's a challenge Because remember that when you're in a cult, it's not this objective experience that you're just rationally observing. You know, your emotions are all over the place, and therefore your perceptions and your let's say your duplication of reality, for lack of a better term, right?
I say that's true about trauma in general, because when a traumatic thing happens to you, you don't always react to it the way people think you're supposed to react to it, and you may categorize it as something else at first, and
that's right.
You just don't understand why this happened to you. Yeah,
exactly. And if all of the lies of the cult and the cult leader are still occupying your headspace, because it takes, you know, it's literally doing the work to undo that, right? So when you're in the middle of the work, it can be really challenging to even see what the problems are. All you know is how you feel, and you feel bad. You feel traumatized. You feel abused. But why? What happened? How did it happen? You know, so many people still believe the cult lies, so they can come out and talk about how, you know, well, yeah, but the governments were after us, and we were being persecuted, and we were, you know, being stalked and harassed by FBI guys and stuff. And they'll feel like maybe that's the source of the trauma, when it has nothing to do with it, because the FBI was never anywhere near them. That was just the cult leader telling them that all the time and keeping them in restricted spaces and not being allowed to go out. Well, those were all lies. The cult leader was just lying to the person that was what was happening, because they wanted full control of the person. You see what I mean? Like you can think something happened to you, and that's not at all what happened to you. So it's usually advisable, therefore, that therapists take an active stance with ex-cult members and not rely too much on reflection and paraphrase. Otherwise, patients may project their failure onto the therapist's blank screen and leave treatment prematurely. Right? Because, as with many other victims of abuse, they continue to blame themselves inappropriately for distress resulting from the psychological assault of the cult. Right? So you don't want to get people talking for hours on end, because they might talk themselves right back into the cult. It's kind of an interesting statement. Again, none of this is universal or, you know, has to apply to you right now as you're listening to this. This is all just food for thought. That's what I'm presenting this for, is so if you don't know this, now you do, and maybe you can include that in your thinking of how to do your recovery process. That's the spirit in which I am offering this. So clinicians, Langione says here, clinicians should make a cult-sensitive assessment. They should not rush to a diagnosis, for much of the emotional turmoil of former cult members is a direct result of psychological assault, not long-standing personality patterns or conflicts. Clinicians should evaluate the positive as well as the negative influences of the cult environment and patients' psychosocial histories in order to identify those factors that may have rendered them susceptible to cultic manipulations and those pre-cult psychological problems that may reemerge after the cult experience. In other words, the cult ain't the only thing wrong with you. And and so there's pre-cult stuff that's going to have to be dealt with, because why were you susceptible to falling into it in the first place? Second gens have a tougher time with that one because they were raised in it. So the priming and the push and the social family dynamics are often a bit tougher than for somebody who's a first gen convert. But either way, there are things that need to be mapped and looked at and taken apart. And that's, you know, that's all part of this. Clinicians should also assess patients' understandings of how cults manipulate and the patient's educational and job skill levels, since many cult members, especially those raised in cults, are educationally and vocationally deprived. Standard psychiatric medications can sometimes be helpful, but because these patients tend to appear to be more disturbed than they actually are, a conservative and watchful medication stance is called for. And that was an interesting statement, because I would never want to lay on anybody that they're exaggerating or that they're hyping it up. I don't think that's the point that Langione is making here. I think it falls more under that business of not totally understanding what happened to you, and therefore blaming or looking at maybe some wrong reasons for why some of the feelings and trauma are there. And this is what the whole cult recovery thing is all about, is dissecting all of that and figuring it out for yourself. So don't let, you know, anybody tell you, you know, that you're too much when it comes to your trauma and stuff. You got to deal with it. Right? But sometimes we can very, very, very much, please just hear this part, right, is that as ex-cult members, we can fool ourselves. We are the easiest ones to fool because we don't really, especially when we first get out, we don't know the landscape. We don't know the words to use or the concepts or phrases out of mental health. Most of that's been suppressed or kept from us or told, or we were told it was all a bunch of bullshit and lies. So there's a lot of hurdles to overcome, and you might not necessarily recognize what they all are right away. It's not a clear path, but it gets clearer as you go. Just talking about at the beginning. It can be hard. Okay. Now, psychotherapy with former cult members includes 5 overlapping goals. Help patients understand the psychological manipulation and abuse to which they were subjected. Obviously, right? Break it apart. Help them manage the day-to-day crises. For example, how to deal with the skeptical Aunt Carol's visit that often seem out of proportion to patients' level of intellectual functioning and psychological history, and that often cause therapists to overestimate the degree of psychopathology in ex-member patients. So, in other words, this step here is help with the daily freakouts, and don't freak out because the patient's freaking out. Right? That's kind of the key message here, at least as I read it, is help them manage these things so that the relationships that they have are a little smoother every time, every interaction, make things a little bit better if we can, so that the levels just come down and down and down in terms of stress, anxiety, freak out, you know? And there's really no other way to go about doing that than lived experience. You have to live through the visit with Aunt Carol and realize you're still alive at the end and everything's fine, and you know, and you survived it, right? So you can talk about it endlessly, but then there's the actual just do the visit and survive. And therapists need to know that they need to be there for their patients to help them manage that without freaking out. Help patients reconnect to and repair their pasts, personal relationships, goals, interests. Grieve over lost time. That's certainly something that you got to do. Grieve over lost friendships and sense of purpose. And compare and contrast their cult and mainstream lives. To the extent possible, mobilize patients' social support network and other resources. And finally, help patients integrate their cult experience into the rest of their life experience. So there you go, right? The final thing from tonight that I wanted to throw out from this paper was something that I had not considered before, but I'm sure it happened to Michael and maybe some other counselors as well. And that is, what do you do if a cult member shows up to you as a therapist and they want help with something, but it has nothing to do with their cult? I'm depressed, doctor. I don't feel good.
Oh, but they're still in the cult?
But they're still in the cult. And it's got nothing to do with the cult, right? I'm not here to talk to you about, you know, TM.
Yeah.
I'm here to talk to you about my depression.
And how do you convince them that they're probably depressed because they're in a cult?
Or do you?
Yeah.
Or do you even know that?
Right.
Right? What assumptions can you make? What can you not? There's a whole thing in here on that because that's interesting. I wanted to just bring it up to you guys just as total food for thought. I'm still thinking on this one because it's talk about tricky.
Yeah.
Right? You're not there to manage as a therapist or as a counselor or as somebody who's working with people. You're not there to manage their lives. And if that's what, it's kind of like parents who think they own their children, right? It doesn't, no, you're there to facilitate that person becoming better at what they want to do, not dictate their lives, right?
Exactly.
So that's a tough one. And you'd have to, I believe, and again, I'm not a licensed therapist, but and I don't even play one on TV, actually. But in terms of how I would go about working with people, even as an unlicensed whatever, I am not there to put goals there for the person or tell them what road they should be on. That's for them to figure out. My job is to facilitate them by helping them with information, advice, some experience, some life experience, some references, right? Some information that can assist them with that. That's the kind of stuff I do with people, and it works wonders. I mean, people don't know what to do. You give them some information, they go, "Holy shit," and they run with it, and you never hear from them again. And it's awesome because they're running, right? Or they get something and it's like, "Oh, well, that helped a little bit. Good. Now the next thing, and now the next thing." And it's a continuing process. It goes both ways, depending on the needs of the person. But what's not there is, okay, in order for me to say you are recovered from this cult, you have to say the cult recovery cognition, right? Like the clear cognition or something, right? Like, "Oh, I've been mocking up my own reactive mind. I've been mocking up the cult in my head." Can't have any of that. Okay, so let's maybe start. So those were the things I wanted to go over here with you guys on that stuff tonight. Those were my papers. I hope that was interesting. I sure found it interesting. I had this triple D thing was like, oh, wow. And I really liked clarifying the word dread. But the deception, dependency, and dread model, this idea that they're deceiving you, and then they create a dependency, and this is what I've been talking about ever since the beginning, right? It's codependent relationship. You are in a cult, and you stay there because you are codependent with the cult. The cult needs you, but your emotional center has convinced you that this group is everything to you, and you cannot leave it. And I wish that was more easily understood, because it answers the question, why don't people just leave? That's why. On top of the fear induction, the whole thing of inducing dread in you, that if you leave, you're going to die. It's all going to end. And all those hopes and dreams you had, and all that money you spent, and all those hours you spent praying or meditating or chakraing or whatever you were doing, that's all wasted. That was all just gone, right? Nobody wants that. Very few people can easily deal with something like that. And so it's easier to stay. They think. It's not.
Nope.
Trust me. When you get out, you're going to be so glad you got out. It's not easier to stay. It's not at all. It's just part of the lies that we told ourselves as cult members. Getting out was the single best thing I ever did for myself in my entire life. No question about it. Okay. Let's just take a quick look here and see what we got in the comments. I would, Leslie asks me here, Chris, will you keep bringing them back to the question as to what it is they want from coming for therapy? I would engage in very subtle seed planting is what I would do. And by subtle, I mean working with the person as to what they can accept to hear, or ideas that I could introduce that would create non-binaries for them. That would be my focus. Is cult members think in binaries, the black and white, right? Us versus them. It's all very black and white in that world. It's a world of certainty and rules and structure. And so I would do whatever I could while working with the person on exactly what they wanted to deal with. I would try to introduce either examples or exercises or something that the person could do, which would be legit, totally correct things for them to do as part of their treatment. But it would also, yeah, it's fine. It would also contribute to maybe a little bit of eye-opening. That's how I might think to approach it, at least as I think about it right now. But you're always going to end up dealing with the person in front of you. Okay, so, all right. Let's go ahead and start moving toward wrapping up. I have a podcast tomorrow for you guys that I really, really hope you will check out and enjoy. It is with a woman named Ann Betts. She is somebody who is well-schooled in neuroscience. And we had a really, really interesting talk about different culty things. I'm calling it Where Neuroscience and Cults Sort of Cross. I think is what I titled it, or something like that, right, where they meet. Because there's a lot of interesting brain stuff we have to talk about that we give you in the podcast. So I hope you guys will check that out tomorrow. And I will be here live with you at 1 o'clock on Sunday, Denver time. So what's our logical fallacy for this week?
Well, it's a bias, and your bias is anchoring. The first thing you judge influences your judgment of all that follows. Human minds are associative in nature. So the order in which we receive information helps determine the course of our judgments and perceptions. Be especially mindful of this bias during negotiations.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay, I have to think on that one.
Yeah.
All right. Good. So I think we're wrapping up. All right, folks. I want to thank you for coming around and watching us blabber on hair at a mad rate as always. You can find this article in full, by the way, at I should put a link in the notes on this one. It's at psychiatrictimes.com under clinical update cults. So anyway, this article is still live for you to check out if you want to read the whole thing. All right. Thank you very much for
You're welcome.
Your assistance. All right. Thank you guys for watching, and see you guys soon.
Good night.